A dull thud, something heavy hitting the wall. I flinched, my gaze automatically darting to the old, intricately patterned rug tacked above my bed. The shouts, which had been growing in intensity, seemed to reach their crescendo. Minutes earlier, I might have been able to make out a few words, but now they had blurred into an indistinguishable shriek. My heart hammered with a mix of anxiety and fear. My neighbors' arguments across the hall had become a daily occurrence, yet I still hadn't grown accustomed to their fierce altercations. I'd only been living in this old 8-story building for 2 months. I'd had to move out of my childhood home. I couldn't stand being under the same roof as my dad's new girlfriend, who was only about 5 years older than me. I had my father to thank for the small studio apartment he bought me for my 18th birthday, declaring he didn't want his daughter stuck in some questionable dorm. But maybe a dorm would have been more peaceful. My new place initially suited me perfectly. There was a supermarket on the ground floor, and the university was just one bus stop away. A man-made lake and park were nearby, where I'd enjoy leisurely evening strolls. It surprised me that a flat in such a pleasant area was so cheap. A week later, I found out why. It all revolved around apartment number 38. Not just our building, but the entire complex, and even the surrounding neighborhood, knew the notorious occupants of that ill-fated apartment. A couple named the Millers lived there. Brenda, or just Bren, a plump woman of indeterminate age. She had a puffy face with perpetual dark circles, yellowish skin, and seemed to own only one garish, floral housecoat with a large patch on the stomach. Her faded blonde hair was a constant chaotic nest, as if it had never seen a comb or a bar of soap. Her voice was low and raspy. Even without looking at Bren, one could easily mistake her for a man, and a very old one at that. Her husband, Mick, in contrast, was thin and lanky, with enormous bags under his eyes that could fit a couple of potatoes. A swollen nose dangled above his upper lip. His bottom lip perpetually hung open. Sparse tufts of colorless hair stuck out from behind his prominent ears. Unlike his wife, Mick sometimes swapped his stained undershirt for a couple of other, equally unclean t-shirts. The first time I encountered Brenda, or rather, found her, she was lying near the building entrance. Her housecoat was hiked up, revealing her underwear. She had fresh scrapes on her knees, presumably from a fall. But the woman didn't seem to care. She was wriggling on the dusty asphalt like an overturned turtle, muttering something unintelligibly. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I rushed to her, placing my grocery bag on the ground, and shot a disapproving glance at the neighbor from the 3rd floor who was unloading bags from her car's trunk. "Don't bother with her," the neighbor said loudly, slamming her trunk shut. "She's the local drunk. Her husband will be here soon to sort her out." And indeed, a minute later, Mick appeared from around the corner of the building, holding onto the wall with one hand. In his other hand, he clutched a crumpled black bag where glass bottles clinked. The man's head trembled slightly, and his legs were wide apart for balance. "Bren," he slurred, his voice hoarse. "Bren, what are you doing there?" "Oh, Mick, help me." "Darling, I fell," his Brenda moaned, raising her hands. "God, when are you two going to drink yourselves to death?" the neighbor grumbled, spitting on the ground, and opened the building's front door. I slipped in after her, not wanting to witness any more of the Millers' antics. After that, I often saw them, one after another, passed out in the yard, and once, leaving my apartment, I accidentally hit Mick on the head with my door. He was peacefully curled up in the communal hallway, having created a small puddle around himself. Sometimes, I'd run into their guests in the stairwell, who were just as disreputable as the occupants of apartment 38. Not only did they sometimes reek, but they could also suddenly unleash a torrent of profanity and even leave a mess on the stairs. It was terrifying to leave the apartment, especially for children and the elderly. I can't recall a single day when I saw the Millers sober. In the mornings, they might have terrible fights, often escalating to blows, and then by evening, they'd passionately make up. Or vice versa. This sweet couple reminded me of a troll and a goblin poisoning the lives of a small village. In this case, an entire apartment building. And the main thing was that there was no way to control them. The police no longer responded to neighbors' complaints. The local officer would carelessly wave them off, saying it wasn't his jurisdiction. "They're not aggressive," he'd say. "They're just drunk and passed out wherever." Though what did he mean by not aggressive? Neighbors told me several particularly entertaining stories about the Millers. For instance, how Brenda once took over the entire playground, screaming at children and their mothers to scare them away, and then started throwing rocks at them. Mick once snatched an old man's cane and hit him several times on the back. Surprisingly, even then, nothing happened to the Millers. I myself watched from my window as the perpetually inebriated couple punched a delivery driver with a pink backpack for no apparent reason. However, the most chilling discovery was near the trash chute on the second floor. I stumbled upon the corpse of a stray cat. The poor thing was completely crimson, and a bloody trail led directly to apartment 38. When accused of its murder, both Millers just laughed. They even threatened to get to the rest of the stray cats that the elderly residents fed and chopped them into mincemeat. One day, I decided to post the Millers' story online, expose the police's inaction, and stir up outrage. There were many comments. Some even suggested contacting a TV show, and I seriously considered it. I even spoke with some neighbors who were all for it. But, alas, recently I was returning home from classes, pleased that my professor had highly praised my report on Sumerian cuneiform. The weather was dry and warm. I was thinking about a walk around the lake with a friend. Approaching my building, I slowed my pace, fumbling in my bag for my keys. I couldn't see the bench where the chatty elderly neighbors usually sat, hidden by a parked car. But that day, they weren't there. Rounding the car, I involuntarily stopped, frozen with my bag still raised. The Millers occupied the entire bench. Next to a tilted trash can stood a tall bottle of vodka, with only a tiny bit left at the bottom. This meant both were already quite drunk. Looking at them, a cold shiver of revulsion ran through me. The Millers were sitting, pressed tightly against each other. One of Brenda's legs, covered in bluish veins, was propped on Mick's thin knees. Her housecoat was unbuttoned almost to her navel, and her husband's right hand, having slipped under the thin fabric, was massaging his wife's fleshy breast. They were passionately kissing, smacking and slurping as if trying to eat each other's tongues. Pulling away from her husband, Brenda breathed heavily, as if she'd just run a marathon. "Do you remember?" Mick rasped, nudging her cheek with his nose. "How we were by the fence in the village." "Oh, Mick, help me, darling." I fell. The woman croaked, dropping her hiked-up leg to the ground. In its place, Brenda's hand slipped into Mick's dark-stained pants and actively began to squirm there. Mick let out a loud groan. Nausea rose in my throat, and I snapped out of my shock. Clenching my keys tightly in my hand, pricking my palm, I practically ran for my door. Trying not to look at them, I jabbed my electronic key into the intercom lock and darted into the dimly lit hallway. I exhaled, realizing I had unconsciously held my breath in disgust. Unbelievable, right out in the open, only 10 meters from the children's playground. However, it was useless to explain anything to them. All their brains had long since been pickled in alcohol. Slinging my bag over my shoulder, I headed for the stairs. I usually didn't use the elevator, it was only the second floor. As soon as I reached the first landing, I heard the intercom chime. The hallway brightened for a second as the door opened. I turned to see which neighbor was coming home. Maybe I should say hello? For a moment, a tall, hunched figure with long, thin arms flashed in the rectangle of daylight. Swinging them wide as they ran, they approached me too quickly. I only managed to open my mouth in surprise. Fingers smelling of smoked bacon clamped tightly into my hair and forcefully slammed my head against the wall. It felt like my head had cracked open. There was such a loud ringing in my ears and a terrible, blinding flash of pain. The next moment, I realized I was falling down the stairs, counting several steps with my knees and hitting my shoulder hard, somehow managing to curl up as I fell. My heart pounded somewhere in my throat from terror. The right side of my head was simply splitting with pain. Tears blurred my vision. Getting to my hands and knees, gasping through sobs, I crawled towards the door, trying to yell out a plea for help. A kick to my ribs knocked all the air out of me. I collapsed back onto the floor, curled up, trying to draw a ragged breath. Several more blows rained down on my torso, my backside, and my head. Then I was again grabbed tightly by my disheveled hair. I was shaken, lifted, Foul breath touched my tear-soaked cheek. "If you ever utter another word about me and my wife again," Mick rasped, his voice semi-hoarse, his lips brushing my earlobe. "Just one more line on the internet, and I'll gouge out your insides." He said something else about my eyes, my mouth, and my genitals. What'd he do to them if I didn't delete all the posts about his family? My mind was a jumble, but I understood the gist. He was directly threatening to kill me. I nodded several times, assuring him I would delete everything immediately. Finally, he spat directly in my face and left back to the yard. I sat on the dirty floor for a long time, hysterical. My whole body ached, especially my head. I carefully felt it, checking if there was any blood. I barely made it to my apartment, didn't get the key in the lock on the first try, and, without undressing, collapsed onto the couch. It was the worst day of my life. Despite the terrible headache and burning in my chest, I didn't go to the hospital. I was afraid to poke my nose out of the house, especially since I could hear the Millers' raspy voices outside my window, as if they were just waiting for me to appear. I lay at home for 2 days, high on painkillers. I could have called an ambulance, but I was afraid the crazy drunk neighbors would attack me and the medics. I hoped I'd feel better soon. Waking up this morning, I couldn't tell if I felt better or worse. My head throbbed, pulsing with a tight pain, especially where it had hit the wall. I moved around the apartment with difficulty, holding onto the wall, and couldn't straighten my back due to the sharp pain in my side. Let's hope it's just a bad bruise and not a fracture. After swallowing some painkillers, I collapsed onto the couch with my phone. As I was texting my class representative, the first scream erupted from next door, making me almost drop my phone. The yelling made my head ache again, and my heart pounded with fear. And so, the neighbors' arguments continued for about an hour, sometimes quieting down, then escalating into shouts again. How much more of this could I tolerate? My empty stomach grumbled. I needed to get up and make something to eat, especially since some pills shouldn't be taken on an empty stomach. Wrapping my right arm around my torso and clenching my teeth to keep from groaning, I slowly sat up, letting my legs dangle to the floor. Gripping the hard armrest, I pulled myself off the couch, unable to suppress a muffled growl from a brief flash of pain under my left breast. My vision blurred for a moment. Amidst the ceaseless banging on the wall and truly piggish shrieks, I hobbled to the kitchen. I should have bought earplugs ages ago. Hadn't someone suggested it? Opening the refrigerator, I grimaced in annoyance. I hadn't been to the store for only a couple of days, and there was nothing to eat. Only a carton of milk, a bottle of kefir, a couple of preserves my friend had brought me, and some spoiled salad remained. That certainly wouldn't fill me up. All right, I'd have to risk it. I needed to order delivery and hope the Millers wouldn't attack the courier again. I definitely couldn't make it to the store myself, and my face looked awful after the beating, pale with dark circles under my eyes. I looked like a panda. I was too ashamed to go out in public. While I waited for delivery, I was glad the Millers had finally shut up. They weren't in the yard, and the bench was, as usual, occupied by elderly neighbors. They had probably made up and passed out in a drunken stupor. Then everything would surely be calm until evening. 20 minutes after ordering, the intercom chimed melodically. I immediately picked up, as I had been pacing in the hallway, waiting for the courier. I turned the lock, pushed open the front door, and flinched in surprise. The old wooden door to the Millers' apartment was wide open. A heavy silence hung in their apartment and the common corridor. All I could hear was the rattling of the elevator. Why were the neighbors' doors open? Had one of them run away, or had something happened? Curiosity outweighed my fear of the Millers. I took a cautious step forward, crossing the threshold. I let go of my doorknob, leaned slightly forward, craning my neck. The first thing that caught my eye, instantly sending a wave of goosebumps down my spine, was a smeared handprint on the door, large splashes on the faded wallpaper in the hallway, and a spreading puddle on the dirty linoleum. Blood. It was definitely blood. I knew the Millers regularly fought, breaking each other's noses and lips, biting, scratching. But where was all this blood coming from? It was too much. I started to tremble slightly. My head pulsed with pain again, but I still took a couple more steps forward, aligning myself with the entrance to the terrifying apartment. A smeared trail from the bloody puddle in the hallway led to the kitchen. I could see the table, cluttered with bottles and plates with leftover snacks. The window was curtainless, with a diagonal crack in the glass. An overturned stool with scattered shards of broken dishes around it. Next to the stool, I could see Brenda's bare feet and the hem of her housecoat. Her heels were stained with blood. It looked like she had been dragged from the front door to the kitchen. No matter how much I disliked Brenda, she was a living person. I had to help her. Clenching the zipper of my housecoat with trembling fingers, I opened my mouth to softly call out to the woman. I froze, wondering if Mick was suddenly in the house. Would he attack me too? And as if reading my thoughts, Mick appeared in the kitchen. He emerged from behind the wall, stepping over his wife as if she were a lifeless log, and froze in the doorway. The light from the window was behind him, so I couldn't clearly see the man's face, but his eyes seemed to glow ominously in the dimness. In the silence, I heard his hoarse, rattling breathing like a winded horse. The neighbor's white undershirt was wet and red on his chest. In his right hand, he clutched the long handle of an axe, and in his left, I gasped, pressing my palm to my mouth. He tightly held his wife's matted, bloody head. Her face was disfigured by a diagonal axe blow that had crushed her nose. Her right eye was a swollen, bloody mess. Her left eye had popped out of its orbit. Her swollen tongue lolled out of her mouth. A palpable, hot dread seized my brain. I had to run immediately. I had to quickly lock myself in my apartment, bolt all the locks. But I felt as if I were rooted to the floor. My legs were numb. I stood still, breathing rapidly, feeling hot tears stream down my cheeks, silently screaming to myself, "Run, you fool, run." But I couldn't move. Mick made a strange guttural sound and, with a wide swing, hurled Brenda's head directly at me across the hallway. It flew as if in slow motion, tumbling through the air, her tongue swaying. That's when I snapped out of it. I screamed as loud as my lungs allowed, shielding myself with my hands. The head didn't hit my elbows hard and landed on the floor with a sickening thud. Without looking at it, I lunged for my door. The sudden movement sent a sharp pain through my side. My head spun, either from the injury or the unimaginable horror. Leaping over the threshold, I managed to grab the crooked doorknob with both hands. A scorching, sharp pain seared my left shoulder blade. I cried out, falling to my knees as my legs gave way. Warm trickles ran down my back. My top immediately got wet and stuck to my skin. I turned around, still gripping the doorknob, and saw Mick standing over me. His eyes burned with insane fury. Foam appeared at the corners of his distorted mouth. He raised the axe above his head, ready to strike. People usually say that before death, one's whole life flashes before their eyes. But I just thought of my father. How upset he would be to hear about me. Something green and square hit Mick heavily with a thud. Losing his balance, my neighbor staggered to the side and leaned his back against a vertical water pipe. A bulky courier backpack landed on the floor between us. The guy in the same bright jacket, grabbing me under the arms, easily pulled me into the apartment. Mick roared, like a bear, and lunged at us. The courier slammed the door shut right in his face, leaning all his weight against it. My neighbor yelled even louder. His right arm, up to the shoulder, managed to squeeze into the gap, waving in the air with hooked fingers, snagging the canvas fabric of the courier's jacket, and then crawled higher. It found the guy's exposed neck and clamped down hard on his throat. The guy gasped raggedly. The door under him trembled. The gap between it and the frame widened. A little more, and Mick would burst in. Leaning my hand on the shoe cabinet, I managed to stand up, gritting my teeth against the pain. Unable to think of anything better, I rushed to the courier and sank my teeth into the neighbor's flabby but strong arm. The ringing in my ears intensified terribly from Mick's scream. He jerked. The door shook violently with loud thuds, but I didn't let go of the killer's arm, sinking my teeth deeper into his flesh. Finally, with a powerful shove of the door, the neighbor managed to yank his arm out. The courier immediately slammed the door shut, turned the lock as far as it would go, and we both backed away from it. Mick, yelling something incoherent, pounded on the door with the axe, kicking it so hard that it shook, barely holding on its hinges. I felt nauseous from the taste of blood in my mouth and the whole situation. My face was wet, either from tears or from sweat. "Are you all right?" the courier asked. "Did he hit you hard?" I couldn't really see his face, even though he was standing nearby. His features somehow didn't register in my throbbing head. I don't know, I mumbled, leaning against the bathroom door with my right shoulder. My left side felt like it was on fire. Everything around me seemed unreal, as if I had just dozed off on the couch and was having a nightmare. How wonderful it would be to just wake up. After a minute of the Miller's futile attempts to break into my apartment, he gave up. I could hear him angrily growling as he headed for the stairs, the axe clanking against the walls. Was he going outside? There were so many people out there. Damn it, the courier swore, pacing nervously in the hallway. I called the police. They're not answering. We need to help, I stammered. We need to warn them. Leaning one hand on the wall, I headed to the kitchen window. The space around me swayed as if I had suddenly found myself on a ship at sea. My legs were numb, refusing to move. The courier said something loudly to me, but I couldn't make out a single word. Again, that annoying ringing in my ears. I didn't notice the small table in my path, bumped into it, and grabbed the edge to keep from falling. I took 2 more steps, bumping my shoulder against the refrigerator. Cans clinked inside, and a couple of magnets fell off the door. Finally, I reached the window, gripping the sill tightly. I blinked rapidly to clear the haze from my eyes. I reached a trembling hand for the handle to turn it and open the window. Then I needed to take a deep breath and scream to the people below to run and hide. Clenching the cool plastic in my palm, I looked down at the courtyard. On such a warm, sunny day, the playground and nearby benches were empty. Instead, a dozen children of various ages were scattering across the yard with shrieks. Were they playing tag? No. A girl was crawling on her hands and knees past the sandbox. Mick followed her unhurriedly. Catching up, he forcefully kicked the girl in the backside, flattening her on the ground. He stepped on her back, preventing her from getting up, and raised the axe. A sharp swing downwards, and I clearly saw, through the haze in my eyes, the sharpened blade strike her light head. I felt as if I heard the crunch of a broken skull. A sour taste of nausea rose in my throat. My legs weakened, buckled, and I collapsed to my knees, helplessly clutching the windowsill. My fingers finally slipped from the smooth surface, but I was prevented from falling to the floor by someone else's hands, which quickly caught me by the back. However, my consciousness still plummeted into blackness. I woke up in the hospital the next morning. My head throbbed with pain in time with the heavy beats of my heart. The bright room swam before my eyes. The first thing I could clearly make out was my father's pale face, and behind him, timidly shuffling, was his young wife with wet cheeks and puffy red eyes. I didn't quite believe she was crying because of me. From them, I learned that I had lost a lot of blood, and if it hadn't been for Alex, the courier, who gave me first aid, the ambulance wouldn't have made it to the hospital in time to save me. I disagreed a bit. If it hadn't been for Alex, I would have died much earlier. Then my father told me that Mick, having drunk himself into a violent frenzy, had killed 3 people yesterday. His wife, an elderly neighbor from the first floor who was sitting on the bench, and that young girl. In total, including myself, 6 people were affected. Mick ran through the streets like a mad dog off its leash, attacking everyone he saw, until a passing traffic patrol shot him. It made me sick to hear all of it. I confessed to Dad that I felt guilty. I should have tried to stop him, somehow restrain Mick or take the axe from him, or just called the police all day long. If I had just listened when I first heard Brenda's screams instead of ignoring them, those victims wouldn't exist. My dad, along with his wife, insisted that I was definitely not to blame for what happened, and that I wouldn't have survived if I had tried to tackle the enraged neighbor. I guess they're right. At least, that's what I want to believe. But in this terrible story, I found some positives. Now, apartment number 38 will be completely silent. Our building will be peaceful,